In a church in Rome, there's a piece of wood that's been revered for hundreds of years. It's said to be one of the most important Christian relics ever found. Those who believe in it say it's a piece of the true cross, the cross Christ was crucified on.
For Christianity, it's a very important relic because it was hanging on the cross of Christ. It is an authentic relic of the true cross.
But is this piece of wood really part of Christ's cross? Is there any hard evidence to back the claim, or is it a fantasy?
The idea that all of this is necessarily ridiculous and medieval superstition and so on is something we should just suspend judgment on.
This is the story of one man's attempt to prove that the relic in Rome really is an authentic piece of the cross of Christ. Michael Hesseman is a historian. He specializes in religious history. For years, he's been on a quest. He wants to prove the authenticity of a piece of wood he believes is part of the original cross on which Christ was crucified. The so-called true cross.
It is the most important relic of Christianity because it is a silent witness of the crucifixion of our Lord.
Hesseman is not the first person to make such claims for a piece of wood. For hundreds of years, adventurers have brought back what they claim are samples of the true cross. There are dozens of fragments of wood purporting to be from Christ's crucifixion. But Hesseman believes his relic is very different from all the rest. The relic is housed in a church in Rome known as Santa Croce, or the Church of the Holy Cross. It's called the Titulus Crucis, literally the title of the cross. It's a fragment of a larger piece of wood, which, according to the Bible, was placed above the head of Christ as he hung on the cross. On it are written the words, Jesus of Nazareth, in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Some of the exact words recorded in the Bible.
The Gospel, according to St. John, tells us about the title of the cross, and I quote, "And Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and the writing was, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews."
No one questions such plaques were placed above the heads of those crucified. So if Christ died on the cross, he almost certainly would have had one too.
We know from Roman contemporary sources, Roman historians, but indeed, in most cases, the name of a person sentenced to death and the reason for this penalty were mentioned. And in the case of Christ, it was a very plausible inscription, Jesus of Nazareth, which was the name under which he was known. And the crime was to claim to be the King of the Jews.
For Hesseman, it's this inscription on the relic in Santa Croce that makes it so special. It's the only fragment of wood, he believes, with a credible link to the original cross of Christ.
When I saw it the very first time in the Basilica di Santa Croce in Rome, I was fascinated by the possibility that we do have an authentic, important relic going back towards the events in 30 AD, the sentence of Pontius Pilate, the crucifixion of Christ.
If he's right, it's a potential superstar among Christian relics.
If the title is authentic, we have the only surviving relic of the most important court case in history, the case of Jesus of Nazareth, and the potential to be the oldest written record mentioning the name of Jesus Christ.
15 years ago, Hesseman set out to prove its authenticity. Was there any evidence the fragment of wood he could see in Rome had come from the Holy Land? And if there was, how had it traveled 1,500 miles from the Middle East? The quest for answers would take Hesseman on a long and confusing journey. As Hesseman trawled back through the records, he found the first man to look for relics of the true cross was a Roman. In the 4th century AD, the Emperor Constantine had been struggling to unite the Roman Empire under his control.
The empire is vast. It reaches from Britain in the west, it takes in North Africa, it goes up into Middle Europe, it extends over into Turkey and so on. It's vast. It's also highly diverse. It's got peoples from different nations, different ethnic groups, different religions. And so there's always the possibility of revolution or insurrection.
What Constantine needed was a unifying belief system that would pull the empire together. He had found it in the new religion of Christianity.
It's pretty clear that he's seen in Christianity the possibility of a uniting force, something that can give the empire, across its full range, a common identity.
But to give the new religion popular appeal, Constantine needed symbols. One answer was relics, physical objects that could be traced back to Christ himself. For Hesseman, Constantine's search was an obvious place to start his quest. Was there any record that in his hunt for relics all those years ago, Constantine had found the true cross? The trail was nearly 2,000 years old. Hesseman's research led him to the work of a man in Sweden. Stephen Borghammar is Professor of Biblical Studies at the University of Lund in southern Sweden. He's drawn together memoirs and biographies from the time and produced an exhaustive account of Constantine's hunt for relics. They tell how the Roman Emperor's 70-year-old mother, Empress Helena, was sent to find the true cross.
By some accounts, Constantine sends Helena off to look for holy places, for relics of Christ's birth, passion, resurrection, ascension into heaven. By other accounts, it is Helena's own initiative.
Whichever version is true, in AD 325, Helena set off on a major expedition. Borghammar's work enabled Hesseman to trace the journey in some detail.
The journey started near Constantinople, present-day Istanbul. And if they had taken the land route, they would have gone basically from north to south in present-day Turkey, passing through the Taurus Mountains. And then they would have gone along the coast, basically down to Caesarea, and then by some route up to Jerusalem.
It was a journey of over 700 miles. It would have been tough going for somebody half Helena's age.
It's a long journey, a difficult journey, partly an uncertain journey. And of course, she's not exactly sure what she's going to find when she gets there. So I think we must assume that whatever else may be the case, she's a pretty impressive figure.
Helena's journey in pursuit of relics would be celebrated in paintings and murals. It took her several months. Helena finally arrived in Jerusalem. Here, one of the first places she looked for was the site of Christ's crucifixion.
She asks around. She asks the Christians. She asks some Jews. She asks some Romans. She asks whoever she can. What do we know about this? What's the narrative? Where was the Lord crucified?
She soon learned Christians were already venerating the symbol of Christ's crucifixion, the cross.
From early Christianity onwards, we find traces of the veneration of the cross. We find crosses inscribed on Christian ossuaries in Jerusalem. We found indications where the cross was a sacred symbol of Christianity from the very beginning.
Experience the past like never before with History Hit's award-winning original documentaries and ad-free podcasts with our expert historians like Dan Snow, Susanna Lipscomb, Lucy Worsley, Mary Beard, Tristan Hughes and myself, Matt Lewis. Sign up for an exclusive discount using the link in the description and embark on your historical journey from the wonders of ancient Egypt and the life of Anne Boleyn to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte and the discovery of Shackleton's endurance. Get history wherever, whenever, exclusively on History Hit.
But were there any physical remains of the original True Cross? According to popular legend, Helena soon found a man who appeared to know where fragments were buried. But he wouldn't tell. So Helena, in the fashion of the day, ordered him tortured.
She puts him at the bottom of a well for a whole week without food, and then he softens and he says, "Okay, I'll show you the spot."
He took her to what was believed to be the site of the crucifixion. As Hesseman traced the story, he discovered Helena had found a Roman temple to Venus on top of the site.
Helena gives the instruction that the existing Roman temple is to be demolished and that excavations are to begin in search of the site of Christ's crucifixion. So she digs down and she finds a cistern, an area that was part of the water system but long ago dried up. And she finds the remains of 3 crosses.
Three crosses, identical to the account in the Bible which relates that Christ was crucified alongside 2 thieves. For Helena, it must have been a big moment, but also a puzzling one. How could she tell which was the wood of Christ's cross? Digging through records, Hesseman found the answer in an account written at the time. It came from a man known as Ambrose of Milan.
Ambrose of Milan was one of the most highly regarded bishops in the Christian world, in the Mediterranean world, in his lifetime.
Ambrose records that Helena had found among the pieces of wood a vital clue. She hadn't just found beams of wood. Attached to one cross was the titulus crucis, the piece of wood said to have hung above Christ's head.
The account in Ambrose is fairly detailed, telling the whole story of Helena finding the cross and mentioning also that the titulus was found together with it.
Hesemann then found a second corroborating account.
More or less at the same time as Ambrose, a church father called John Chrysostom, who was the bishop of Antioch, mentions this event. He says that the authenticity of the cross was proved because the titulus was still attached to it, it was sticking to it.
This is what Hesemann was looking for. Here was clear evidence that Helena had found the original true cross. And the proof was she'd also found the titulus crucis, the piece of wood Hesemann could see in the church in Rome.
As a historian working with the original sources, I have no doubt at all that the finding of the true cross under St. Helena in Jerusalem in 325 AD was a historical fact. Indeed, the titulus helped her to be sure that these pieces of wood found were indeed remains and relics of the crucifixion of Christ and not just of any other crucifixion.
But is any of this story really true? Had Helena even been to Jerusalem? One piece of proof was a very solid celebration of her achievement. To mark the site of her success in finding the true cross, she built a church. It's called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Today, it's one of Jerusalem's most visited and important holy places. Hesemann had traced the first link in his hunt to prove the authenticity of the titulus crucis. He'd found strong evidence for its discovery. The next task was to find the link between Helena's discovery and the fragment of wood in Rome, over 1,000 miles away. Hesemann worked his way through the various accounts. He discovered that soon after finding the cross, Helena had divided the relics.
The early church historians mention that the findings were divided, that she sent a part of the wood of the true cross, a part of the nails, she found 3 nails, to her son in Constantinople. A part remained in Jerusalem, and the third part was taken to Rome.
One of the best witnesses to this distribution of relics was Cyril, the 4th century bishop of Jerusalem.
Cyril of Jerusalem mentioned in a letter that the true cross was divided in so many parts that it filled the earth, the face of the earth.
Hesemann found 4th and 5th century records of the true cross reaching Gaul, North Africa, Asia Minor, and Syria. And he also found something that would prove critical to his quest. Helena had not just divided up the wood of the cross. She'd also cut up the titulus crucis itself. simply chopped it into several pieces. Exactly how many bits remains uncertain. But there's a good account of what became of at least one piece in Jerusalem. Some 60 years after Helena's triumph, it was seen by a Spanish pilgrim. She was called Egeria.
She tells how on one particular day there was a celebratory event in which a box was produced. The Bishop of Jerusalem, assisted by some presbyters, or we might now think of as kind of priest figures, attended this. The box was open, and revealed within it were parts of the cross and the titulus itself.
Egeria says she has seen it, and she is, generally speaking, a good witness to things and persons and events. She seems to be very reliable.
Here was further proof the true cross had been found and had survived. But Hesemann also found something else. Helena had kept one piece of the relic for herself. Hesemann now made another crucial link in the story. In Rome, he found accounts that suggested Helena had brought some of the relics home with her.
When St. Helena returned to Rome, she brought 3 relics, a large fragment of the 2 cross, half of the titulus crucis, and one of the nails found.
It seems Helena never intended these relics for public display. They were destined for her private palace. In the second half of the 4th century AD, Helena died. Her sarcophagus is in St. Peter's in Rome. It's decorated with highlights from her life. She was canonized and is often depicted with a cross. Hesemann had completed the next link in his quest. He had traced the titulus from Jerusalem to Rome. But at this point, the trail gets murky. What had become of the relic after Helena's death? Hesemann now needed to find new sources of evidence. He turned to church records in Rome. Here he found that Helena had donated her relics, including the titulus crucis, to the Pope, Sylvester I.
When St. Helena died, she passed on in her testament her palace with everything which was in it, including her private chapel and the relics.
Several years after her death, the Pope built a new church on top of her palace. He called it the Church of Santa Croce, or the Holy Cross.
If you go to Rome, you can still see the walls of the Roman palace incorporated into the basilica.
But as Hesemann searched further, the records were tantalizingly vague. There seemed to be no mention of the relics themselves. Then the story became even more confused. Reading through church records, Hesemann found that 800 years after Helena's death, in the 12th century, the Church of Santa Croce had undergone extensive restoration. But again, the records made no mention of the relics, or even if they still existed. The trail seemed to have gone completely cold. But then there was a breakthrough. Checking church archives, Hesseman came across an account dating from 1492 of repair work on the ceiling of Santa Croce.
In the part which originally was the chapel, the private chapel of Sancta Helena, they removed the mosaics which were falling down and found a brick with an inscription, Titulus Crucis. Of course, they removed this brick, and behind they found a box. They removed it, they found the seal of a cardinal from the 12th century, from 1144. And they broke the seal. They opened it and they found the piece of wood with the inscription in 3 languages, Jesus of Nazareth. The fragment of the Titulus Crucis, the fragment of the inscription of the cross.
It was an extraordinary discovery. The first confirmed sighting of the Titulus Crucis for over 1,000 years. Hesseman now put together what must have happened. When the church had been restored in the 12th century, the relics must have been packed away in the roof, where they'd remained until their discovery in 1492. Hesseman was back on the trail of the Titulus. Or was he? The discovery raised another question. If it was genuine, why would one of the most important Christian relics of all time remain hidden in the roof of a chapel? Hesseman puzzled over what might have happened at Santa Croce. Finally, he came up with an answer.
In the early Middle Ages and late Antiquity, it was normal not to expose relics for public veneration, but to hide them in the walls of a church, because they believe that it sanctifies the entire church.
In Hesseman's judgment, the very fact that the Titulus Crucis had remained hidden away lent it even greater authenticity.
Who is creating a complicated fake to hide it in a wall? Not to expose it, not to show it, not to tell people, look what we have, to attract pilgrims during the holy years in Rome. Not to collect donations from the pilgrims, not to expose it for public veneration, but to hide it in a wall. This doesn't make sense at all to me.
Whatever the truth, Hesseman found that in 1492, the church authorities put the Titulus Crucis on public display, where it's remained ever since. Hesseman had successfully linked the Titulus Crucis in Rome back to the Holy Land. Yet some links in the story were still uncertain. In particular, the link between the Titulus arriving in Rome and its discovery by workmen in the 15th century was weak. What he needed was definitive evidence that would link the relic in Rome with Helena's discovery of it, 1,200 years earlier. Hesseman now embarked on a close scrutiny of the fragment of the Titulus itself.
The Titulus Crucis is a piece of brown nutwood, 25 by 14 centimeters in size, 700 grams in weight. And it is obviously the right-hand corner of something bigger, because we have a high degree of decay on the top on the right and the lower side, but a very clear cut on the left.
That cut was crucial. It matched exactly the account of Helena cutting up the titulus crucis. Hessemann then looked at the text. It was written, like Hebrew, from right to left. This suggested it might well have been inscribed by a native of Jerusalem.
It has 3 lines of inscription in Hebrew, in Greek, and in Latin, all giving the same information: Yeshu Hanozri, I.Nazarenus, I.Nazarenus, the name of Jesus of Nazareth.
The colouring was also typical of the Roman era in Palestine.
The letters have remains of black color inside, and the brown wood was covered with the remains of white chalk. So obviously it was originally black and white. And this is typical for Roman wood tablets in general. They make the colorization so it's better readable.
But it was the words on the titulus crucis that particularly attracted Hessemann's attention. There are 2 biblical accounts of the words on the titulus. The first comes from the Gospel of Luke. He says the order was Greek on top, then Latin, then Hebrew. The second account comes from the Gospel of John. He reports the order as Hebrew first, then Latin, then Greek. But the order on the actual titulus is different from both. It goes Hebrew, then Greek, then Latin. This was the first puzzle. More puzzling still, there were variations in the spelling of the word Nazareth.
In all Latin translations of the Gospel according to John, it is written Nazarenus, but here on the titulus it is written Nazarenus, with an I instead of an E.
For Hessemann, these errors were highly significant.
No forger would ever make spelling mistakes in a forgery.
They led him to conclude they were vital clues that proved the authenticity of the titulus crucis.
There are too many freedoms, there are too many differences from the information we have in the Gospel. No forger would take the freedom to change the spelling, to change the order, even to write from right to left. This all indicates that it was a spontaneous creation and not an elaborated fake. And that's why I believe it was indeed the original inscription of the cross of Jesus of Nazareth.
In other words, for Hessemann, the very fact that the writing on the titulus was different from the version in the Gospels proved it was authentic. A forger would never make such basic mistakes. But that left one final question. Could an inscribed piece of wood really have survived nearly 2,000 years? The answer came, unexpectedly, from Roman remains in Britain, Hadrian's Wall. In 1973, archaeologists digging at the Roman fort of Vindolanda found nearly 2,000 handwritten tablets made of slivers of wood. They dated from the time of Christ. They had been beautifully preserved in waterlogged soil where there was almost no oxygen present. Oxygen encourages decay. The conditions were almost identical to those in which the titulus crucis is thought to have been found.
You can ask, if a piece of wood can survive 2,000 years? And the answer is, of course. Especially if the tradition is true, what the remains, what the 3 crosses were found in an old cistern.
Hesseman now had at least 5 clues that, in his judgment, pointed to the titulus being authentic. First, the evidence from Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan, appeared to confirm Helena had dug up the titulus crucis in Jerusalem. Second, the record from Cyril of Jerusalem suggested she divided the relics and distributed them across the world. Third, the fact that it had been hidden during the Middle Ages suggested it was the real thing. Why hide a fake? 4. Variations between the wording on the actual titulus and the accounts in the Gospels again pointed to its authenticity. No forger would risk such blatant errors. And now, finally, evidence from Hadrian's Wall suggested a wooden tablet with writing on it could, under the right conditions, survive 2,000 years. For Hesseman, the evidence was now overwhelming. The titulus in Rome was authentic. He had found a relic of the true cross. Hesseman took his findings to the highest authority.
I found it a relevant discovery for the Christian faith, and that's why I presented it to Pope John Paul II.
History doesn't relate what the Pope's response was, but a number of senior Christians are prepared to give Hesseman's titulus crucis at least the benefit of the doubt.
If we ask ourselves the question, what relics might have survived from the crucifixion, it's in fact highly likely that among those would have been this title that was put upon the cross. It's so important as identifying the figure of Jesus that it's very likely that it would have been preserved, and of course it was very easy to remove and take away. So the idea that all of this is necessarily ridiculous and medieval superstition and so on is something we should just suspend judgment on.
But are they right? So far, all Hesseman's evidence had either been a paper trail or had relied on basic archaeological techniques. Could hard scientific scrutiny now back this up? The investigation was about to take a new twist. In 2002, a laboratory at the University of Rome conducted radiocarbon dating tests on the titulus crucis. If it was authentic, it should date from around 30 AD.
They took 6 samples from the back of the titulus crucis. You do a level of pre-treatment that should get rid of any contaminant carbon from the sample.
After this decontamination, the tiny pieces of wood were analysed for their radiocarbon-14 content to discover their age.
They also analysed other samples of known age as confirmation that the accuracy and precision was fine. And they came up with a consensus value that was significantly different from what you would have expected.
The conclusion was unequivocal.
When the radiocarbon age was calibrated, it gave a calendar age range of 890 to 1150 AD, and that's with 95.4% probability.
In short, the relic in Rome dated from the Middle Ages, 900 years after the death of Christ. It could not be part of the true cross. But for some, this is not the end of the matter. They argue carbon dating has been wrong before. One of the most famous controversies was in the 1980s. In 1988, samples of the Turin shroud were tested for their age. The shroud is a piece of fabric bearing an apparently 3D image of a Christ-like human face. Legend says the cloth was placed over the face of Jesus after his crucifixion and miraculously picked up his image. When samples of the shroud were sent to 3 different laboratories for radiocarbon dating, the results suggested it was a medieval fake.
The results were comparable between the 3 laboratories and gave an age range of 1260 to 1390 AD with a 95.4% probability that the true age lies within that span. Now that's not to say that the other 5% is way out of that span.
Yet a number of people, few of them scientists, have challenged the finding. They believe there were fundamental problems with the sample. It was contaminated.
The shroud has a vast history. People have gotten their fingers all over it. Artists have copied it. There's been paint dropped on it. It's been in countless numbers of chapels and so on, with all that atmosphere there. It's been through a fire, at least one we know of, and doused with water. The fire was so hot that it melted the metal casket that the shroud was in. So all of these are tremendous contaminants.
They argue that problems like these have discredited carbon-14 testing, certainly in the case of the shroud.
Carbon-14 is certainly valid and a good procedure along with other procedures, but it certainly also can be wrong, as in this case, in my opinion. It was botched.
Most scientists dispute this challenge. But similar arguments about contamination are now raging around the titulus crucis. For Hessemann, the carbon dating results are simply not credible.
When I learned about the result of the carbon dating, claiming to be a forgery from the Middle Ages, it was clear for me that it has to be wrong. We know that carbon dating is only reliable in 75% of the cases, but there's a 25% margin of factors which cannot be controlled, factors of contamination and conditions we do not know.
In particular, Hessemann believes there will have been carbon contamination from candles and human breath. These more recent carbon deposits would, he argues, have built up, impregnating the ancient wood. That in turn could have led to a false reading in the carbon dating tests. But Gordon Cook, a recognized expert in carbon dating, profoundly disagrees.
The idea that 25% of all radiocarbon tests are wrong is quite preposterous. You could argue that the smoke from the candles could have embedded itself in the wood, but when the pre-treatment that was undertaken should have removed virtually all of that.
Yet Hessemann has now dismissed all carbon dating tests of the titulus crucis. He believes he's found a much more reliable alternative form of dating. It's a method that draws on changing styles of handwriting. It's called comparative paleography.
This method is accepted in history because people changed the way of writing during the ages. If you have a letter written by your granny during World War II, the handwriting is different from the handwriting of people today.
Comparative paleography argues that the writing style of one period is not only different from another, But during any one period, there is a clear uniformity of style. So a medieval text will always look different from a piece of copperplate writing, which in turn could never be mistaken for a 19th century piece of writing. Hesseman sent photographs of the text on the Titulus Crucis to a number of experts.
I presented copies of the Titulus Crucis to 7 experts on comparative paleography of 3 different universities in Israel.
The experts examined the Greek, Hebrew, and Latin texts. They all, apparently, came to the same conclusion.
All of them, experts on Latin, Greek, and Hebrew paleography in the Holy Land, scholars who worked with the Dead Sea Scrolls, dated it into the 1st century, the time of Christ.
But is comparative paleography really more reliable than carbon dating? For over 60 years, scientists have used carbon-14 tests to date ancient artifacts, from Egyptian pyramids to medieval church relics. It has consistently proved reliable.
Radiocarbon dating has a scientific basis. We can calculate an age on an object. If you take paleographic techniques, it would be possible to forge an earlier writing style on a piece of wood to make it look like the Titulus Crucis.
Yet Michael Hesseman is unmoved.
We have not a single case where comparative paleography is wrong, where people in the Middle Ages prove that they were able to write like people wrote 1,000 years before. If I, as a historian, have the choice between 2 methods, comparative paleography and carbon dating, I trust comparative paleography.
There, for now, the matter rests. To most scientists, the evidence from carbon dating makes it highly unlikely that Titulus Crucis is part of the true cross. But that won't stop some people believing in it. To many Christians, the idea that Christ's cross has survived is just too powerful an idea. Legend tells that somewhere in South America, there is a great city of gold, El Dorado. A fabulously rich and sophisticated kingdom that was once home to thousands of people living deep in the heart of the Amazon jungle.
This was a stone city with squares and grand plazas and wonderful buildings with columns and carvings and statues.
To most people, it was just a legend. But for British explorer, 57-year-old Percy Fawcett, it was real.
It wasn't that far-fetched to imagine that somewhere deep in Amazonia, there was a major civilization.
Convinced he knew the location of this lost world, he spent years searching for it.
He was someone prepared to put his life on the line, head off into the middle of nowhere, and do whatever it took to achieve his goal.
With his son Jack and his best friend Raleigh, Fawcett set out in 1925 to find it.
They were convinced that this was going to be a great success and that they were all going to be really rich.
30 days into their journey, Fawcett wrote to his wife, "You have no fear of any failure." Then all 3 vanished. This is the story behind Percy Fawcett's dream. And it seems that he may have been onto something. There really may have been a great civilization in the jungle, but its riches were not gold. The true secret of the real El Dorado was something with the amazing power to completely transform all our lives. In the spring of 1906, Percy Fawcett was summoned to a meeting at the Royal Geographical Society in London and was made an offer he couldn't refuse.
Fawcett, have a look at this.
The Bolivian government wanted someone to map its borders with Brazil, and 39-year-old Fawcett was perfect for the job. His family motto was "Difficulties be damned." All his life he excelled at everything he had ever done. He was a first-class cricketer, an officer in the Royal Artillery, and a former British Secret Service spy in Morocco. But critically, he was a highly trained mapmaker and geographical surveyor who had been taught how to fix his position anywhere in the world. Fawcett's mission would be to survey and map the western Bolivian borders with Peru and Brazil. And his exploration, he was told, would be difficult and dangerous. But to Fawcett, all this sounded like a dream job. The romantic history of the Spanish and Portuguese conquests of South America and the mystery of its jungles pulled him in. Now his heart was pounding, even though there were complications.
There were my wife and son to consider, and another child on the way. But destiny intended me to go, so there could be no other answer.
Fawcett's destiny had been sealed from a very early age.
I think he was about 6 or 7, and the family was living on the Devon coast. He discovered some Roman remains in a cave near where they were living, and they excited him enormously. It made him the center of attention, and it caught his imagination. And I think that it was that single incident that put the spark there. And for the rest of his life, he was searching for treasure.
It was this thirst for adventure that made the Amazon job so irresistible.
There is something about the Amazon. It's the greatest of all rainforests. It's something like 3,500 miles across. And I think it's that mystery that somehow got to Fawcett, drew him out there and away from all he'd loved into a place of danger.
From 1906 to 1911, Fawcett made several difficult surveying expeditions into the Amazon jungle.
Fawcett was a person who had really extraordinary field skills, and it's important to realize that the kinds of work that he did do was not easy at all.
Not only did Fawcett have to deal with the hostile environment,
Disease fevers of one kind or another were everywhere. People were going down within days of starting work in these areas.
but to make it worse, Fawcett was surveying in an area crawling with dangerous locals.
He was in one of the most contentious parts of the Amazon, in one of the most inflammatory periods in Amazonian history.
There were very hostile tribes in the very areas he was going through. There were roaming gangs, people who threatened your lives, people who were killing people. All of this would, to many people, have made the assignment sound terrible, but of course, to Fawcett, it was just like throwing coal on the fire. He loved it.
But as the years passed by, something else was beckoning him. Fawcett was becoming hooked on exploring the Amazon jungle.
Deep down inside of me, a tiny voice was calling. At first, scarcely audible, it persisted until I could no longer ignore it. Inexplicably, amazingly, I knew I loved that hell. Its fiendish grasp had captured me.
Fawcett realized that the surveying work was holding him back, and by 1911 he had had enough and resigned.
Fawcett once said that he much preferred the company of savages to civilized boors. I think that says a lot about the man, that he was someone who was a maverick, who was an outsider, who wanted freedom, who sort of embraced the wilds somehow.
Fawcett's heart was in exploration, but what he needed now was a mission grand enough to satisfy his passion.
When he first went out and was surveying, he heard stories of an advanced civilization in Brazil.
He was on to the gossip, these stories that twirled around and swirled around these areas.
He didn't reject them, he rather accepted them. And it was those stories that led him piecing them together like a jigsaw puzzle.
I had by this time heard in several places vague traditions about the remains of the ancient civilizations, and my imagination was stirred by them to such an extent that the urge to investigate was becoming more and more insistent.
We knew that there were incredible civilizations in the highlands and in Mexico, so why would there not be, in the heart of Amazonia, some extraordinary civilization that people just hadn't gotten around to finding?
Then in the same year Fawcett stopped surveying, the ancient Inca ruins of Machu Picchu were discovered in the Peruvian Andes by the US. It was the most important find in South America since the days of the Spanish conquest. This really fired Fawcett's belief. He became certain that there had to be something even more fabulous out there.
Machu Picchu's romantic discovery was recent news, but my objective dated much earlier than the Incas, and I felt it was to be sought farther east, in the wilds still unknown. All the great Indian tribes had traditions of a once great civilization to the east.
He was in an area which was at the confluence not just of the Inca civilizations, but also the confluence of Bolivian civilizations and these upper Amazonian civilizations. And those areas were talked about with a great deal of interest in the early exploration in the 1500s.
One story that obsessed Fawcett was the historical account of the Spanish conquistadors' Amazon expedition in 1541.
Fawcett was very familiar with the literature of the Amazon, and he must have been hugely struck by the earliest accounts from the 16th century. People like Francisco de Orellana, who was the man who first descended the Amazon and discovered it for Europe.
For 8 months, Orellana and his 57 conquistadors traveled downriver towards the sea searching for El Dorado, a kingdom of gold described by various Indian tribes as being a city deep inside the jungle.
And eventually, as they went down, they met large groups of people in villages. They went as far as finding roads heading to the interior. They heard that there were towns in the interior.
Orellana tells us that there were highly populated riverbanks, and we're talking about communities perhaps of 20,000 strong. So this must have played on Fawcett's mind.
They recorded a different set of groups and different groups of people. Some were dressed, some were not. And they noted that they were in very large quantities.
Could this be what Fawcett was looking for? If so, where was this city? Fawcett then came across another intriguing record housed in Rio's National Archives Library in Brazil.
One of the documents that we know particularly fascinated Fawcett was document 512.
This decaying historical account was known simply by the catalogue number 512 because it had no author. The name of the person who discovered the city had worn away, so Fawcett called him Francisco Raposo. Raposo was a Portuguese soldier of fortune who described how, after a long, troublesome journey incited by the insatiable greed of gold, he and his men came across a mountain path that had been cut by man rather than by nature. And when they reached the top, they saw a spellbinding vista, a huge deserted city. The man Fawcett dubbed Raposo had written,
"We went on into the strange city, and we came on a road of great length and a well-set-out plaza, and in the middle of the plaza, a column of black stone of extraordinary grandeur. We went with fear and trembling into some of the houses, and in none did we find vestiges of furniture or movable objects by which or whose use we might guess at the sort of people who had dwelt therein."
The city was deserted, but within it they found all manner of fantastic things, these large halls and columned buildings and broad boulevards, just like something you might find in ancient Greece, or imagine you'd find in ancient Greece, sitting there right in the middle of the jungle, at a fork in the river.
We marveled that this place had been abandoned by those who had formerly inhabited it, for with all our careful investigations and great diligence, we had met no person in this wilderness who might tell us of this deplorable marvel of an abandoned city, whose ruins, statues, and grandeur attested its former populousness, wealth, and its flourishing in the centuries past.
Fawcett was fascinated. Raposo had come across this vast lost city.
I've looked at it myself, and it conjures up images of a lost world, a sort of city of gold.
Although there was no mention in the document of the city's location, Fawcett now had further evidence of the existence of an ancient civilization deep inside the Amazon jungle. And he was also convinced that this was the same city that Oriana had seen 200 years earlier.
It was exactly what he was looking for. It was proof positive. This wasn't his imagination. This wasn't something he'd made up, or that was just the myth story of native peoples. Here we had it in black and white.
Had Oriana and Raposo seen the lost city of El Dorado? Fawcett himself would never call it El Dorado. "I call it Zed for the sake of convenience," he wrote. Even though Fawcett had never seen this lost city, he was happy to describe what it would look like to his younger son, Brian.
The central place I call Zed, our main objective, is in a valley surmounted by lofty mountains. The valley is about 10 miles wide, and the city is on an eminence in the middle of it, approached by a barreled roadway of stone. I expect the ruins to be monolithic in character, more ancient than the oldest Egyptian discoveries. Judging by inscriptions found in many parts of Brazil, the inhabitants used an alphabetical writing allied to many ancient European and Asian scripts.
We don't really know an exact moment when Zed came into his mind. He had always believed that there were certain places in the world that were home to advanced civilizations.
Fawcett was also convinced of something else. He believed that the people who lived in these remote, hidden places possessed extraordinary abilities. In this, he had been influenced by his peculiar upbringing.
Fawcett had a very unusual background as an explorer. He wasn't someone whose father was someone who wanted to get to the South Pole or North Pole. Nothing obvious about him at all. Rather the opposite. He was from a strange background, you could say.
His aristocratic father spent the family's wealth and died of drink at the age of 45. And so it was to his mother the young Percy turned for inspiration.
His mother was very interested in spiritualism and had a very great influence on Fawcett, and it lasted all his life.
Fawcett's wife, Nina, was also interested in seances and astrology, and his elder brother, Edward, was a member of the Theosophy movement, a philosophical school formed by Helena Petrova Blavatsky to obtain hidden wisdom and enlightenment.
He was influenced particularly in the religious area. Among other things, Percy at one point went out to India to be with Helena Blavatsky.
Blavatsky's many followers included Gandhi, Thomas Edison, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. All this greatly inspired Fawcett's beliefs, especially Blavatsky's conviction that there were master priests capable of producing psychic messages to save mankind, and they lived in remote cities in such places as Tibet and South America. By September 1914, Fawcett was getting closer to locating his lost city of Zed, in his mind, a vast spiritual civilization. But before he could go, the First World War broke out. Fawcett found himself in the thick of it on the Western Front.
He fought some of the major battles and was very active, was mentioned in dispatches, was promoted in the field to colonel. I think that for several days he was actually a general.
By the end of the war, Fawcett had received 2 medals, the Distinguished Service Medal for Bravery and a gold medal from the Royal Geographical Society for his historic mapping of South America. But his obsession hadn't left him. On his return to England, Fawcett was more determined than ever to make his path to Zed, as he called it, a reality. Fawcett told his young son, Brian,
"The answer to the enigma of ancient South America, and perhaps of the prehistoric world, may be found when those old cities are located and opened up to scientific research. That the cities exist, I know."
Gradually, piece by piece, clue by clue, Fawcett zeroed in on where Zed had to be. Influences from his past, especially his mother and Helena Blavatsky. Conversations with tribal peoples. Archival records from Francisco de Orellana's 1541 expedition of seeing communities 20,000 strong. And Raposo's account of a spellbinding vista of a huge deserted city eventually pointed Fawcett to just one place. His lost city of Zed lay alongside the Xingu River in an area of southwestern Brazil called the Mato Grosso. All he needed was the money to get there. But Fawcett was facing severe setbacks. Britain was exhausted after the war and experiencing a severe economic collapse.
To return again would take every penny I could find. I came out of the war convinced that as a world power, Britain was on the wane. Many thousands must have come through those 4 years of mud and blood with the same disillusionment.
Raising money for another Amazon expedition proved almost impossible.
His hopes were dashed very quickly. He had hoped that the Royal Geographical Society would provide the funds. He found that there wasn't money to come.
Money wasn't the only thing Fawcett had to contend with. Fawcett's professional colleagues began to question the importance and validity of his quest for a lost city called Zed.
People were beginning to say, just a minute, some of these stories this fellow are telling are nonsense. This can't be right. It doesn't make sense. Do we really want to finance this stuff?
Many felt that the lost city of Zed could not exist for environmental reasons. They argued that the soil of the Amazon was simply not productive enough to support a large society. Seething with frustration, Fawcett wrote,
"I cannot induce scientific men to accept the supposition that there are traces of an old civilization in the Amazon."
But eventually, help did come. Although the Royal Geographical Society couldn't pay for Fawcett's next expedition, they did support his application with the Brazilian government to secure some money. In 1920, Fawcett was back in the Amazon, searching for his El Dorado, the lost city of Zed, with 2 male companions. But the expedition didn't go smoothly. Rains flooded their route and destroyed their equipment. Four weeks into their journey, their animals started to die. A starving dog had to be shot, and Fawcett killed one of their horses to put it out of its misery. The place became known as Dead Horse Camp. Then one of Fawcett's companions suffered a mental breakdown, and the other ran off to Rio to get married. Undeterred, Fawcett carried on alone.
He really was obsessed with finding this city. People were falling sick all around him, but somehow it didn't seem to affect him. He could go on and on and on.
All explorers are driven people. You've got to be driven. You've got to be someone who is able to hang on to your vision, whatever you come across. And yet, this is a man apart. He really was a fanatic.
Always driven by the hope of finding Zed, the hope that it was over the next hill, that there would be a new scrap of information that would lead him there.
Loneliness is not intolerable when enthusiasm for a quest fills the mind. The chief disadvantage seemed to be that were I to find anything of scientific or archaeological value, there would be no witnesses to support my word.
Soon, finding Zed became the least of Fawcett's worries.
The rainforest looks incredibly abundant. It looks like the perfect place to survive in. But the soils are thin. A lot of that food is right up in the tree canopy. Up there, the monkeys. Your greatest danger is starvation.
Starvation sounds almost unbelievable in forest country, and yet it is only too likely to happen.
And after 3 months alone in the jungle, exhausted, without food, and close to death, Fawcett abandoned his expedition. Back home in Devon, he would spend the next 2 years kicking his heels with frustration.
The last few years have been the most wretched and disillusioning of my life, full of anxieties. My wife and children have been sacrificed for it.
I think that his wife and children missed him enormously. Nina particularly was very sad and lonely with his long, long absences, and the children doted on him.
Of our 24 years of married life, only 10 have been spent together. Apart from 4 years in the Great War, I have spent 10 in the forest.
You have to feel for his wife, poor old Nina. Whenever he was back in Devon, he felt he wanted to exchange that love and that comfort that she could provide for the danger, for the mystery of the Amazon.
Who will ever understand that I want no glory from it, no money for myself, that I am doing it unpaid in the hope that its ultimate benefit to mankind will justify the years spent in the quest?
In desperation, Fawcett went to New York to find backers for his next expedition.
These kinds of expeditions were quite costly. So he had to be able to self-promote and to make this seem as the most important imaginable expedition out there at the time, so that he could attract the funds, attract the attention.
And Fawcett did attract some attention. His promotional speeches convinced scientific institutions like the Museum of the American Indian and the American Geographical Society to support his journey with $1,000 each. But it wasn't nearly enough.
He gave a series of lectures, he went around to see big business. Fawcett was not a man to bring doubt into his conversation. He spoke very forcefully.
But he still couldn't raise the money and was forced to come up with a new plan.
Fawcett was quite a bit of a self-promoter. He constructed things as what we might call a kind of reality show, in which he would then be able to catapult himself into an icon of exploration.
Fawcett approached the National American Newspaper Alliance, whose members had a paper in almost every city in the country, with a novel idea. He would send runners back out of the jungle with minute-by-minute dispatches of their quest to find the lost city of Zed, so his readers would be able to follow and experience their journey as it happened. Captivated by his idea, the newspapers gave Fawcett a very lucrative deal. Similar deals were made with newspapers around the world, ensuring millions of readers. But most of the money would only be paid to Fawcett on the completion of their journey.
In some ways, I am rather glad that not one of the three of us makes a red cent unless the journey is successful, for nobody can say we were after the money in undertaking this rather perilous quest.
In 1924, Fawcett was back in Britain. As news of the planned expedition grew in excitement and support, the Royal Geographical Society agreed to pay for their equipment. Eventually, Fawcett managed to raise around $5,000, the very bare minimum, Fawcett believed, to get them through to Zed.
I found enough to make it imperative to go again. With the right companions, the right organization, and knowledge of the right way to go in, it can be brought to a successful conclusion. And our story, when we return from the next expedition, may thrill the world.
But Fawcett was reluctant to give too much away to the press before they left.
I cannot say all I know, or even be precise as to the locality, for these things leak out, and there can be nothing so bitter to the pioneer as to find the crown of his work anticipated.
A traveller is someone who wanders along, perhaps just for the sheer hell of it, but an explorer has a dream, has a vision, and is determined not just to pull off that vision, but to bring back information, bring back evidence of whatever it is he or she has found.
After his disastrous last expedition, Fawcett carefully picked his travel companions this time. His son Jack, now 21, and as strong as a horse and as keen as mustard, wanted to go with him. With Jack was his lifelong friend, Raleigh Rimmel.
Fawcett knew what he was up against. He was hardened. He'd seen firsthand the forest. He'd lived there. But that wasn't the case for his two companions. Raleigh Rimmel in his 20s, his son Jack, again in his 20s, totally fresh, totally naive.
Fawcett warned them both of the risks.
It would be one of the most difficult and dangerous expeditions in the history of exploration, the ultimate test of faith, courage, and determination.
So here was a man who understood the importance of precision, and yet here also was a mystic, a man who was prepared to set off with two inexperienced companions into the blue, into a mapless state, and wander around somehow until he found his lost city.
He told his wife, he said, look, we're going to be away a long time. It could be a year. Don't be frightened. Don't expect to hear from us. We're going to go forward. We're going to find Zed. We're going to have this enormous success.
In January 1925, Fawcett, Jack and Raleigh sailed from New York to Brazil, watched by the world's press.
It was a world-renowned expedition, and it was being followed very closely. By this time, they had been interviewed by all of the major newspapers. People were really excited that they were going off to find a lost civilization, and they believed they were going to do it. And so there was indeed a huge send-off. He was a major celebrity. Front page news.
The following month, they left Rio de Janeiro on their 1,000-mile journey by train and boat into the interior of Brazil. Their destination? The Mato Grosso's capital, Cuiabá. Fawcett called it their stepping-off point. On April the 20th, 1925, Fawcett, Jack and Raleigh put on their explorers' outfits and Stetson hats, grabbed their .30 caliber rifles and 18-inch machetes, and left for the jungle. Opinion was divided as to whether their expedition was sheer lunacy or not.
It's a little bit like Fitzcarraldo, where everyone thinks, oh, what a nut, getting a ship over a mountain and putting it on another tributary. But people were doing that all the time. So even though we might think it's the sign of total madness, in fact, at the time, it was a reasonable conjecture and a bold thing to try.
Their direction was towards the Mato Grosso's upper Xingu River system, a tributary of the Amazon where Fawcett believed the city of Zed would be.
The Mato Grosso is thick forest. Mato Grosso, that's what it means. And it is a devil of a place. That's the sort of phrase he would have used. A thick, nasty place. We're used to seeing a horizon. We're used to heading towards something. But in the forest, you see tree after tree after tree, and no more so than in the Mato Grosso.
Sticking to the deal made with the press, Fawcett used runners to keep the public informed of their progress.
As they went on each step of the journey, Fawcett would write a report of what they had seen, what they had experienced, and this chap would run back to civilization with it. They appeared in the American press, in the British press, in the Australian press, in quite a number of continental European papers.
Jack told his mother of meeting stark naked Indians, of never feeling so well on his 22nd birthday, and that it would take a couple of months to reach Zed, possibly on his daddy's 58th birthday. In fact, things were now becoming difficult for the explorers. In Fawcett's private letters to Nina, another story emerged. Along with descriptions of the difficulties of travelling, he revealed how Raleigh's foot had been poisoned by the insects.
I suspect constitutional weakness, and I fear that we shall be handicapped by him,
he wrote.
There was Raleigh's foot. It was painful, it was slowing them down.
Fawcett warned him that there would be no way out if it got any worse, but Raleigh refused to go back.
Raleigh felt that he'd come all this way. They were so close to the great treasure. He wasn't going to drop out at this stage, no matter what.
They were also approaching an area where there were tribes known to be aggressive.
It was Fawcett's hope that he would be able, as he had in the past, to make friends quickly, to gain their confidence, and in fact, more than their confidence, to gain their generosity because they needed their food.
It is obviously dangerous to penetrate large hordes of Indians traditionally hostile, but I believe in our mission and its purpose. I believe our little party of 3 white men will make friends with them all.
On the 29th of May, 1925, 39 days into their journey, they reached Dead Horse Camp, where Fawcett had passed through on his last expedition.
Fawcett sat alone. We know this because Jack also wrote and said that his father had sat alone and wrote to his beloved Nina back in Devon.
The attempt to write is fraught with much difficulty. Here we are at Dead Horse Camp, the spot where my horse died in 1920. Only his white bones remain. Jack is well and fit. Raleigh I am anxious about. He still has one leg in a bandage, but won't go back. So far we have plenty of food, but I am not sure how long this will last. It is very cold at night and fresh in the morning, but the insects and heat are out in full force come midday, and from then until evening, it is sheer misery in camp. I cannot hope to stand up on this journey better than Jack or Raleigh. My extra years tell, though I do my best to make up for it with enthusiasm. But I had to do this.
Despite all this, Fawcett remained upbeat and ended his letter with,
"You need have no fear of any failure."
The next day, Fawcett gave the guide Nina's letter and waved him goodbye. These were the last words to his wife. With just Jack and Raleigh as company, he headed out into uncharted territory. All over the world, people waited for news, wondering where they were. But there was nothing but silence.
And the tensions on the home front, of course, were just awful. Nina had this great faith in him. She did believe that all was well.
Even 2 years after Fawcett had vanished, Nina believed he was coming back.
Any day now may bring a cable from my husband announcing that he is safe and is returning with Jack and Raleigh.
To read her correspondence is heartbreaking. 10 years after he disappeared, she still believed that he would turn up any day, that he was still alive, probably at that point that he was living in Zed.
But the news she longed for never came. And despite the many search parties sent out to try and find them over the years, their bodies have never been found. "25 years later, in 1955, the New York Times declared that Fawcett's disappearance had set off more searches than those launched through the centuries to find the fabulous El Dorado. Were they killed by Indians, as most believe, or did they die of hunger, or was it something else?
I don't think he was killed by hostile Indians. I don't think he was bitten by a snake. I don't think he was swept away by floodwater. I don't think he's still living out there and immortal in some Shangri-La, some city of gold. I think one or other of them stumbled, fell, couldn't keep on going any longer because of disease. And then the others had a choice. Do we stay with this dying man, our companion, or do we head off and go for help? Well, there's no help available out there, and I'm afraid they probably all died together.
But no one really knows. They had vanished without trace. Did Percy Fawcett and his companions die in vain? Were all those doubters right? There was no great civilization in the jungle called El Dorado. Had he simply been deluded? In recent years, scientists have made a series of extraordinary discoveries. In the same area where Francisco de Orellana and his 57 conquistadors saw cities of 20,000 people in 1541, and just 100 miles west of Fawcett's last search for Zed, compelling evidence of past civilizations is now being unearthed.
He basically traversed one of the areas in which some of the most exciting discoveries in the Amazon basin are taking place.
Hidden in the jungle for several hundred years and only emerging now as trees are felled to create farmland is evidence of a vast network of ancient sites. These sites, seen from the air, show an extraordinary crisscrossed landscape with straight lines cutting across the savanna. Amongst the open plains, there are also thousands of isolated mounds or islands of rich forest linked by giant causeways. Recently, it was discovered in these forest islands there are clear signs of past human habitation. Fragments of food remains, pottery, cooking urns and human bones are now being uncovered on a massive scale. Here was evidence of a huge civilization. Archaeologists believe these sites and forest areas are part of an ancient civilization state that stretches over 160 square miles and was once home to hundreds of thousands of people.
It's important to remember that these cities were as large as Constantinople in the 1500s, or as large as London, which was one of the largest cities of the time. These great civilizations were complex. We know that they had complex religions, they had complex technologies, they were the great engineering societies of the time.
Could these be the remains of the great cities Francisco de Orellana and Raposo had described all those years ago? The ones that inspired Fawcett's quest to find his lost city of Zed? If so, why had they been swallowed up by the jungle? The answer is almost certain, that the people met the fate of all the other Indians who were killed by disease brought in by European explorers. With contact from the Spanish in the 16th century, swiftly over 95% of their population was wiped out, and their homes and cities disappeared with them. But how did these great civilizations exist at all if the most modern agricultural techniques can't seem to make the jungle productive today? How did these large communities of the past manage to do it? The answer may be in the discovery of the mounds of black earth, or terra preta, as the Brazilians call it. It is dotted over many areas of the Amazon jungle. When scientists analyzed this terra preta, they discovered that it contained a mixture of common Amazon yellow soil and organic waste. This meant that it was man-made.
What we understand from ethnographic and archaeological evidence is that these soils formed as a result of very simple activities of burning litter, rubbish, the relocating of bits of soil into other places, and discard of charcoal from pottery production, fish bone, and all the rest.
The extraordinary thing about this black soil is how productive it is. It produces incredibly high yields.
If communities, rather than just plant and harvest the yields that would come out of very poor soils, were able to modify soils, then larger populations could be had, larger villages could be had, and hence larger societies could be had.
It does seem incredible that where we now can't do anything with the soil, This ancient civilization had brought about an agricultural miracle.
Existence of these large populations was predicated on the use of terra preta. It increases productivity in the same way that irrigation increases productivity in dry lands, or terraces increase productivity on mountainous lands.
Terra preta is so remarkable that scientists are now working out how to reproduce it so it can be used all over the world.
I think that what we're going to see is that it's going to play a major role in enhancing the productivity of small and medium-scale agriculture, and also to provide livelihoods and sustenance for rural populations in much of the world.
So Percy Fawcett was onto something. There really was a society out there that may well have had a great treasure to share with us. But it wasn't gold. As he himself had once written,
"The answer to the enigma of ancient South America, and perhaps of the prehistoric world, may be found when those old cities are located and opened up to scientific research. That the cities exist, I know."
In 1938, Adolf Hitler seized what legend said was history's most powerful weapon.
If you hold it, you're invincible.
It was said to be the spear which pierced the side of Christ.
Military leaders became almost besotted with the idea of possessing it.
And with the spear in his grasp, Hitler unleashed terror upon the world. But in the chaos of war, this most valuable of Europe's treasures simply vanished.
This was an emblem of war, twisted by the Nazis to become symbols of the Third Reich.
But one man, Walter Horn, would uncover the mystery of what had happened to the Spear of Destiny. And one of America's finest generals, obsessed with the spear, would launch a mission to find it. In 1933, Adolf Hitler is elected Chancellor of Germany.
Hitler was by no means a normal person to be leading a country in the middle of Europe in the middle of the 20th century, and especially one the size of Germany. He was a very embittered, lonely, twisted, abnormal individual who had an enormous amount of drive and this famous will to power. And that's what really, spurred him on.
He is desperate to be the all-powerful leader of the German people and create a new Germanic empire. The trouble is, he had won less than half of the popular vote.
His grip on power was nothing like as strong as many people think. I mean, after all, most people hadn't voted for Hitler.
The country is divided, and to realize his dreams, he will need to unite it.
Germany was, until just a few years before, in real terms, just a collection of very, very small states. You've got people in, all the way up near the Danish border, and you've got people all the way down near Munich and as far east into what would now be part of Poland. So how do you unify these people?
Hitler encourages the Germans to look to what he says is their past. He wants to portray himself as a man who will restore Germany to a time when it ruled Europe. And he wants to extend its borders to those of the greatest German empire in history, the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire was first created by Charlemagne, Charles the Great, the Germanic king of the Franks in 800 AD. Its purpose? To spread Christianity through all of Europe For 1,000 years it dominated the continent, at its height stretching from the North Sea to the Mediterranean, and ruling over what is now Germany and much of Austria, Poland, Italy and France. Now Hitler wanted to create an even greater empire in his own image. The 1,000-year Nazi Reich with himself at its head.
He wasn't the type of person who would like to cut deals and engage in the art of statesmanship or diplomacy. This is a man who just wanted to drive things forward the way he saw the world should be in his eyes.
But Hitler's difficulty is that there is nothing imperial about him. As the son of a working-class Austrian civil servant, it is not enough to simply proclaim himself the German Führer. He needs to look like one.
He needed to try and assimilate some of the trappings of power and the type of trappings that would be suitable for someone who is ruling a kingdom in the middle of Europe. And of course, what's he going to do? He's going to look back to history to find these things.
He decided that to be an emperor, he would need the possessions of an emperor.
Hitler was looking for an emblem that would underpin his claim to be leading the German people back to a new era.
What do we need? Well, we need various items that are associated with other people in power.
The Holy Roman emperors had held crown jewels as symbols of their authority. An imperial crown, a scepter, and an orb. But of all these symbols of past German glory, one is more important than all the others. It looks like a simple Roman spearhead. It is the Spear of Destiny. The Spear of Destiny was said to be none other than the spear that had pierced the side of Jesus Christ as he hung on the cross. The myth said that it was wielded by a Roman centurion called Longinus.
As the legend is told, Longinus was a Roman centurion who'd served Pilate faithfully, and he got cataracts. He was going blind. And Pilate pulled him out of the ranks because he was no longer of service as a fighter and gave him relative easy duty at Mount Calvary. Making sure the crucifixions went off as planned. It didn't require a lot of fighting, didn't require great eyesight.
The Bible says that this centurion, when inspecting the crucified men, was unsure if Jesus had died. So he thrust his spear into Christ's side.
Blood allegedly dripped down the side of the spear into Longinus' eyes. He was cured of cataracts. He was cured of his blindness. He had a vision of the future. He had a vision of Jesus as the Messiah.
Longinus was converted instantly. As Christianity spreads throughout the world, Longinus' spear, touched by the Son of God, became a revered holy relic. The spear was passed down, first through a succession of Roman emperors, and then to Charlemagne.
Charlemagne carries it into battle, is invincible as long as it's in his hands.
It becomes known as a talisman for conquerors, for military force. It is a military image that it has of vanquishing foes.
Such was its mystique that every Holy Roman Emperor after Charlemagne wanted to possess it. It became a symbol of their authority.
The spear, at a very early point in history, is a reflection of power, of strength.
Legend says that whoever held the spear would be undefeated in battle.
So not only do you get a sense of whoever has this is the true world monarch because he has it, but if you hold it, you're invincible.
It was clear why Hitler wanted it, but he didn't have it. In fact, it was in Vienna, the capital of neighboring Austria. When the Holy Roman Empire was dissolved in 1806, its heirs, the Habsburgs, moved the spear to Austria, where it ended up on display in the Hofburg Palace. And it was here in 1908 that Adolf Hitler, then a struggling Austrian painter, had first seen the spear and begun to covet it.
According to one version of the story, Hitler had actually seen the spear in the museum there, and apparently he may have had some sort of moment of epiphany in which he realised that this was an incredibly important object and he had been sort of touched by it. Whether that's true or not doesn't really matter. The point was, it was regarded as being important.
Hitler had long known where it was, and now he was German Führer. All he had to do was take it. On March the 12th, 1938, German troops crossed the border into Austria. The world watched as the Austrian government collapsed. Hitler was killing two birds with one stone. He was reclaiming lands once held by the Roman Empire, and was now on the brink of seizing the Spear of Destiny.
You've got to realise that Austria and Germany are, in Hitler's eyes, indivisible, and indeed they should never have been divided in the first place.
With Austria in his grasp, Hitler now activated the second part of his plan. To seize the spear.
As the story is told, as the panzers were driving, across the border into Austria, Hitler had an SS officer in civilian garb already planted in the museum. When he was alerted that the border had been crossed, he changed into his uniform, pulled out his gun, and stood guard over those crown jewels. Nobody was to touch them until Hitler arrived.
Hitler arrived in Vienna just 2 days after the invasion.
One of the very first things he does is to go to the Habsburg Museum, go to the display case where the spear and the crown jewels are, and opens it. And takes possession of the spear.
He took hold of the spear on March the 15th. It was not a date picked by accident.
He took the Spear of Destiny on St. Longinus Day. That's when the centurion, who allegedly carried it at the crucifixion, is honored.
Hitler took the spear to the southern German city of Nuremberg, which had been its home for centuries during the reign of the Holy Roman Emperors.
There was absolutely no question where Hitler was going to take the spear once he absconded with it from Austria. He was going to take it back to Nuremberg, back to its spiritual home, what was to be the spiritual headquarters, the spiritual capital of Nazism, of the 1,000-year Reich.
Taking his lead from the Holy Roman Empire, Hitler had decided to place Nuremberg at the center of his new Nazi Reich.
Berlin is the brain, Nuremberg is the heart.
Here he had built vast parade grounds holding hundreds of thousands of spectators. He staged enormous rallies showcasing German military might. Extravagant displays presented the German people with an image of the future based on his vision of the past.
We see newsreels today of the parades going through the streets in Nuremberg, of soldiers dressed as medieval knights. With mock-ups of the chest of the crown jewels, symbolic of being returned to the homeland. The 1,000-year Reich begins.
By displaying the spear and the crown jewels, his message could not have been any clearer.
Ein freies deutsches Volk in einem starken deutschen Reich.
He was the heir to the Holy Roman Emperors.
It was as if King Arthur had finally gotten Excalibur and was marching through town with it. And in a triumphal parade, I got it.
With the Spear of Destiny in his possession, Hitler was convinced he would be unstoppable in his aim to conquer the rest of Europe. But of course, it didn't turn out that way. By the beginning of 1945, 5 years of war has devastated Europe. The spear has failed to bring Hitler the victory he had dreamed of. His ambitions lie in tatters. His empire on the brink of collapse. And in the chaos, the Spear of Destiny, one of the great treasures of Europe, has disappeared. But on an American army base in Belgium, pure luck will allow one man to track it down. Walter Horn is a lieutenant in the US Third Army. His mission? To interrogate German prisoners of war. Horn is no ordinary American GI. For one thing, he's German. And 10 years earlier, he had narrowly escaped the clutches of the SS. In In the 1930s, Horn was at university in Heidelberg, southwest Germany. His passion, art history.
His specialty was the relics of the Holy Roman Empire. He was an art history major who just had the misfortune to get his doctoral degree in 1933, just as Adolf Hitler had come to power.
As a historian, Horn found himself being sucked into Hitler's obsession with proving the superiority of the German race. He was invited to join a special unit of the SS created specifically for this purpose, the Ahnenerbe. Promising academics were press-ganged into the Ahnenerbe. The job? To prove at any cost that German culture was superior to every culture in the world. And who better for the Ahnenerbe to recruit than the impressive young academic and PhD, Walter Horn.
Walter was perfect Nazi material. He had been a javelin contender for the Olympics. He came from fifth-generation Germanic, Aryan stock. You know, he was young, he was good-looking, he was well-traveled. This was the kind of man the Nazis were looking for.
But Horn could see exactly where Nazi control of German academic life was leading.
The Ahnenerbe can't just be seen as a kind of harmless bunch of corrupted academics who were just sucking up to the Nazis, because what they were proving was helping to create a worldview that was in essence evil. And some of these theories are directly related to the idea of race. And we all know what happens when you apply these theories to a regime that is as murderous as the Nazis are. It leads directly to the gates of Auschwitz.
Horn wanted no part of it. So in 1934, he decided to flee Germany.
He didn't want to give up his homeland, but he saw no option around it. One thing he knew is he had to get out of Germany. You know, the storm is coming down. This is no place to be.
But as he began his flight to freedom, Horn learned that the SS were after him.
He was very concerned. He hated the Nazis. He didn't know if it was because of remarks that he had made about the Nazis.
To his horror, one SS officer had managed to track him down.
The SS officer had his pistol, and I'm sure Walter was thinking that the end had come.
But Horn was in for yet another surprise.
The SS officer essentially, told him, yes, we're looking for people like you, but good luck. Just don't come back.
Walter Horn eventually managed to escape via Italy and then Cuba to America, where he became a naturalized American citizen. And that is how, as a fluent German speaker, he ended up in Belgium interrogating POWs at the tail end of the war.
As the Allied armies worked their way into Germany, behind the front lines, you've got units doing various sort of ancillary roles that are nevertheless vitally important. One of these, of course, is to hunt for criminals. Straight manhunts. And what these people are doing, these war crimes units, is to hunt for evidence, which hasn't been burnt by the Gestapo.
For months, Horn had been uncovering very little. But one afternoon, a harmless-looking POW changed all that.
Quite late in the day, relative old man is taken out of the prisoner pen to be interrogated. Private Fritz Huber. Fritz Huber has nothing really to contribute, or so it seems. Private Huber said, I'm sorry, I can't tell you any information because I don't know any information. All I've been doing is, slogging gun cases around. Walter felt sorry for him, offered him a cigarette, offered him a cup of coffee, and they just sat and chatted.
Then, Huber revealed something that would blow Walter Horn's mind.
Huber said, I do know of a special treasure, a hidden treasure. Are you at all interested in art history? Little could Huber have known the man he was talking to had a doctorate in art history. There wasn't anything in the world Walter wanted to hear more about, than art and antiques.
Huber began to tell Horn about a Nazi treasure trove hidden beneath Nuremberg Castle, one which supposedly contained any number of priceless pieces of art. Horn listened intently as Huber listed the sort of items that any imaginary pirate hoard might contain.
Huber was describing various treasures, which could have been any kind of depositories, because we know the Nazis looted, major museums. But this collection was different. He described a scepter. He described a crown. He described a golden orb, what they call, the world orb of Christianity. And then he said, it's a spear. It's a spearhead, Roman spearhead. And of course, Walter knew instantly the collection. There was no question what it was. He was describing, the crown jewels of the Holy Roman Empire and the spear of destiny.
Horn pushed Huber for every detail and was amazed to find out the lengths that the Nazis had gone to protect the Spear of Destiny. Huber said his father had been hired by the head of the Nazi SS, Heinrich Himmler, to install a ventilation system in a hidden vault beneath Nuremberg Castle.
And, oh, by the way, my mother goes in once a week to check on the treasures that are kept in this vault. She has to check the humidity, check against insects. My mother's got to wear white gloves. And as Huber is telling this story, Walter's getting more and more interested.
Huber described a network of tunnels beneath the castle which led out to a secret entrance on the streets below.
It looked like an active, ongoing antique shop, and had two doors for bringing items in and out, but of course it was Nazis who were going the in and out.
Aware that he had possibly just uncovered the location of one of the world's great treasures, Horn immediately began to write up a report for his superiors. But fearing the American High Command wouldn't understand the importance of the spear, Horn made sure to write in detail, even drawing a map of the city to show where the vault could be found.
Walter Horn sat at a borrowed typewriter, and he typed up an intelligence report. And of course, being an art historian, I'm sure it reads more like a art history paper than a military intelligence report.
Horn worked quickly. He knew the advancing Allied forces were planning a huge offensive on Nuremberg. And he feared that in the battle, the spear could be destroyed.
He mailed it off, fully thinking that this would be dismissed as tangential to the fighting going on, that what military commander would possibly conceived the Holy Roman Empire, crown jewels, and the Spear of Destiny to be a military objective.
But in another amazing stroke of luck, Horne's report eventually landed on the desk of the one man who had both the power and the will to save the spear. General George S. Patton, also known as Old Blood and Guts, was in command of the US Third Army in Europe and was one of the generals overseeing the invasion of Germany. A flamboyant man, often pictured with 2 silver revolvers, he was a brilliant tank commander and tactician. A Catholic convert, Patton saw himself as a Christian warrior. But more than that, he too was obsessed with the legend of the Spear of Destiny. He had even written a poem about what it must have felt like to plunge the spear into the side of Christ.
I cannot name my battles, for the visions are not clear. Yet I see the twisted faces, and I feel the rending spear. Perhaps I stabbed our Savior in his sacred helpless side. Yet I have called his name in blessing when after times I died.
As US troops battled their way across Europe, Patton had been attempting to track the spear's movements. His fear was that the spear, if not found, might be used as a talisman to inspire a Nazi resurgence. But so far he had no idea where the spear was, until Walter Horne's report landed on his desk.
Lo and behold, that's exactly what Patton was looking for, and he found it in that intelligence report. Light bulb went off. This was a military objective for Patton.
On the eve of the assault on Nuremberg, Patton took an amazing decision. He ensured that a crack team of soldiers was sent to locate the secret vault. But it would be no easy task. Nuremberg had suffered a series of massive bombing raids. Thousands had died, hundreds of thousands displaced.
They talk about the devastation in Dresden, but the devastation in Dresden essentially came from a fire that spread. In Nuremberg, it was literally from the tons and tons of bombs.
And now the Allies intended to send Hitler a message. They planned to capture Nuremberg on April the 20th, the Führer's birthday. Hitler was adamant that his spiritual capital would not fall.
His instructions are that the defenders of Nuremberg will fight to the last bullet, and the last man and even the last young child.
On April the 16th, the US Army began a fight to the death for the city. Patton's special unit, sent to locate the spear, was soon caught in the thick of the fighting.
It was narrow, medieval streets, big battlements. It was almost essentially hand-to-hand combat, almost like taking one street after another, and it was very dangerous kind of fighting. Children were actually being used as scouts. The Germans fought right down virtually, to the last man standing.
In the chaos of the battle, Patton's unit, armed with Horn's map, embarked on their dangerous mission to locate the secret vault.
That unit lost many men to work their way where the vault was. When they got there, they couldn't even find it. There had been such devastation, so many bombings, and they weren't even sure that they'd gotten to the location.
But then they made a discovery.
One of them found a crevice, a sort of tunnel-like thing, and they dropped in.
At the end of a long, dark underground tunnel, they found something staggering. Set into thick concrete, a steel vault door 8 feet high and 12 inches thick. But there was a problem. The giant vault doors were locked shut.
The door itself was impenetrable at that point. When one of the munitions men was literally about to, plug dynamite in the sides of this giant vault door.
But just moments before the charges were detonated, a German civilian came forward and stopped the munitions man.
Luckily, he was stopped at the last minute because, God knows what might have happened to the contents inside. A German a representative, the mayor of Nuremberg, gave the Allies the combination of this vault. He said, please don't blow this up. Very special things here, and they opened the vault.
Behind the giant door, the GIs discovered a vast and incredibly sophisticated underground complex. This had to be the vault that the prisoner Huber had described, but it was on a scale beyond anything they had imagined. Commissioned by Heinrich Himmler, it was an enormous expansion of old beer cellars beneath the Nuremberg castle.
Himmler secretly sent in teams of architects, teams of builders to reconfigure this beer cellar into a high-tech vault. And I don't use that term high-tech loosely. Foot-thick reinforced steel, special locking mechanisms. The walls were lined with various materials to keep the moisture out. Air purification system, its own generator system. It had water, it had showers, it had baths, it had a kitchen, it had its own little escape hatch. You could have a team of people living in there for months at a time.
The GIs could hardly believe what they had found. But unsure of exactly what they had discovered, the message was sent for Horn to come to Nuremberg to identify the contents of the vault. When Horn arrived, he was shocked by the state of this once beautiful medieval city.
Picture a moonscape, picture churches missing their roofs, bodies strewn about.
Horn was led to the vault. Even though the contents had been described to him by Huber, Horn was stunned by what the vaults contained.
There is just this fantastic room full of Europe's treasure, which can rival anything you'll see in the Louvre or the British Museum, and it really is a real treasure trove. And the guys who went in there realised, my God, how much had the Nazis taken? Every box was just full of something more and more incredible.
Horn was shown a small wooden crate. In it, unmistakable to Horn's expert eyes, was the Spear of Destiny.
Horn became a hero when he recovered the Spear of Destiny. Now the question was, what were they to do with him?
May 1945, the Allies declare victory over Hitler's Nazi regime. 6 years of war draws to a close. Hitler had committed suicide in his Berlin bunker. The Allies uncovered millions of dollars worth of Europe's finest treasures, stolen by the Nazis.
We know the Nazis looted, major museums. Major collections were brought wholesale in by train.
Now began the task of returning these treasures to their rightful owners. Walter Horn had assumed the spear would be returned to Austria.
The Spear of Destiny come from the Hofburg Museum in Vienna. This is where he fully thought they would be returned to. Patton had other ideas.
It seemed that Patton, too, had become bewitched by the power of the Spear of Destiny.
Patton said and openly declared that these relics, this Spear of Destiny, are not artwork. These are emblems of war, twisted by the Nazis to become symbols of the Third Reich.
Patton was the type of man who very much would have liked the idea of the Spear of Destiny, in his back pocket and wanted to take it back to the United States.
Perhaps he believed, as did Hitler, that, whoever possessed the spear would be invincible.
So adamant was Patton on having the spear that Dwight Eisenhower, the supreme commander of all Allied troops in Europe, had to intervene. A huge argument broke out between these two iconic figures. But before it could be resolved, tragedy struck.
His car is hit by a lorry. He's virtually paralyzed. He's in hospital for a short period and then he dies.
With Patton died the last obstacle to the spear returning home to Vienna.
Special plane was dispatched under a very heavy armed guard because these are considered the most valuable treasures that the Nazis had ever looted. And there was a special return ceremony in Austria. And today, they're back in the museum, essentially in the same room, in the same part of the museum where they were when Hitler took them.
But there remains one outstanding question. What was this item that Walter Horn had recovered and that so many people had fought and died for? Could it really be the spear that Charlemagne held, the very spear that pierced Christ's side? Robert Feather, a trained metallurgist, was the first person in 40 years to be allowed to examine the spear scientifically.
I was called in to examine the spear because I'd had previous experience of metallurgical work on ancient artifacts. I trained as a metallurgist and I've sort of done a lot of work in ancient metals and materials.
One of the first tests he did was to see if there were traces of blood on the spear. If it were Christ's blood, it would be the most staggering discovery of all time.
I took swabs of the spear just in case there was any biological material. I mean, if it's a spear, it could have had some blood on it somewhere, and the remotest chance that some of it might be Jesus' blood just occurred. So I thought I'd better do it just in case. Is someone going to say, why didn't you?
But no traces of blood could be found. Next, he did a series of non-destructive tests to uncover the age of the spear.
We did XRF, which is X-ray fluorescent tests. We did microscopic analysis. We did full high-powered X-ray analysis.
These tests finally gave an approximate date to the spear itself. The 7th or 8th century AD.
To say that it was the spear that went into the side of Jesus, I think, is rather difficult, if not virtually impossible.
It's impossible really to have had much contact with someone who had supposedly died 8 centuries before it was made.
Science had proven that the Vienna lance was not the spear that had pierced the side of Christ. So does this mean it is worthless? Had thousands of lives been risked in pursuit of nothing more than a medieval forgery? After all, one uncomfortable fact, even for Hitler, was that it wasn't the only spear claiming to be the spear of destiny.
The problem with the spear is that there are quite a few of them. I mean, I think there are at least 4.
There are competitor spears in different places to the Vienna spear. There's one in Etsmiad in Armenia. It doesn't look very much like a spear, and it's more rather like a Roman bannerhead, but nevertheless they revere it. And there's another one in Poland, which is almost certainly a replica, a later middle-aged reproduction. There's another one in St. Peter's, in the Basilica of St. Peter's, which is said to be part of the spear that pierced the side of Jesus.
But it seems that the spear Hitler coveted had a value that none of the others had.
We know more about the early history of the Vienna spear than any of the others, and we can trace it certainly in written record back to the 8th century.
That date is extremely significant. It was when Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman Emperor, was rising to power. This spear may not have been the spear which pierced Christ's side, but it was the spear held by the Holy Roman Emperors.
There's no question that that spear was the one carried by the Holy Roman Emperors, and that this was the one passed on, throughout history, through tradition, and was the one that Hitler took.
And Hitler had understood something else. It doesn't matter what something is. What matters is what people believe it to be. For centuries, the spear had been revered by the most powerful rulers of Europe, and that, for Hitler, was enough to make it something worth having.
It doesn't really matter whether this was the spear that was shoved into the side of Jesus. It doesn't matter. It's what people think is what matters. It's what people choose to believe.
The fact that it doesn't date back to the crucifixion doesn't make it, to my mind, any less valuable, because what it represents in the larger sense is what's important.
Even though it's very easy today to look at it as all being part of, it's all mumbo-jumbo, it's kind of, junk history, it's kind of mythology, it's superstition, it's important.
The Ark of the Covenant was sacred. It contained God's 10 commandments.
The Ark was the most significant object that has ever existed on the face of the earth.
The Bible tells of its extreme power.
Fiery sparks would emerge.
People would die if they touched it.
God made his power manifest through the ark.
It was his throne on earth.
Yet the ark has been lost for over 2,500 years. Gone, but not forgotten.
The ark exists today. It is somewhere.
Where is it now? That's the million-dollar question.
Over the ages, men have hunted for the ark in Egypt, in the Arabian desert, or even in Ethiopia.
It's like looking for a needle in the haystack.
But one man claimed to have found it in Jerusalem.
He pointed out where he believed it was.
Was he a charlatan, or as he believed, an instrument of God?
God led us right to it.
Ron Wyatt said he saw the Ark of the Covenant with his own eyes and lived to tell the tale. Ron Wyatt was from Kentucky, a poor but God-fearing state in America's Bible Belt.
He came from a very large family that lived in rural Kentucky in the mountains. Much poverty, not much of a chance in life. He had to leave home when he was either 12 or 13.
What Ron knew of the ancient Middle East came from reading the Bible. He was drawn to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, a devout Christian sect where Bible study is a lifetime pursuit. A habit he instilled in his own children, a daughter and 2 sons. Michelle is the eldest and attends this Seventh-day Adventist church near Nashville every Sabbath.
Dad was raised that way his whole life, and we were our entire lives also.
His youngest son was named after him, Ron Wyatt Jr.
We were raised Seventh-day Adventists, fairly strict. I mean, you know, we had to go to church, had to go to Sabbath school.
Seventh-day Adventists believe that the Bible is the Word of God and historically accurate.
You have your Bible class, so you go through there and you study all the different stories in there about David and Moses.
There was something else you saw out there about what Jesus gave to us, and that is the little stars.
At home, every evening we had worship. So we had Bible books, like children's story books, and Dad would read us a story every night. So we got to take turns sitting on his lap while he held the book and read the book. So we were raised our whole lives to believe all of that's true.
So we were always raised up knowing the Bible, no doubt that it's the truth. That's, to us, it was fact.
Ron Wyatt worked in a Tennessee hospital as a nurse anesthetist, but age 44, he made a life-changing decision to prove that the stories of the Bible are true. Loaded up with equipment, including an 8mm cine camera, Ron and his 2 sons, Danny and Ronnie, set off for the foothills of Mount Ararat in Turkey, looking for Noah's Ark. And in a boat-shaped rocky outcrop, they thought they'd found it.
My dad was quite sure that that was Noah's Ark because it's the only boat-shaped object way up in a mountain range in Turkey.
Right here is a piece of Noah's Ark. It's petrified wood, and we found this right up on top of the boat-shaped object.
The next Bible story Ron Wyatt decided to prove true was the parting of the Red Sea. So in 1978, after sub-aqua training in a Nashville swimming pool, Ron and the boys went diving in the Red Sea. They were searching for Egyptian chariot parts to prove Pharaoh's army pursuing Moses and the Israelites had been swallowed up as the parted Red Sea collapsed. The Wyatts were inexperienced in both diving and archaeology, but as soon as they started searching, they found what they were looking for.
Me and my brother saw a chariot wheel, and we saw the back of a chariot turned upside down.
And I found a golden chariot wheel. My dad figured later may have been the Pharaoh's chariot. I did take a picture of it, but that camera did drown, unfortunately.
But Ron's apparently successful search in the Red Sea was suddenly interrupted. Ron had severe sunburn and was unable to continue. As he was convalescing, he went sightseeing in Jerusalem with Danny and Ronnie, when something very odd happened. Ron suddenly stopped walking. He raised his arm. His hand pointed to a derelict area. When he spoke, his voice sounded strange.
There is Jeremiah's grotto, and the Ark of the Covenant is in there.
I'd never heard him mention Jeremiah's grotto. So that surprised him because he was saying, man, I don't know how I said that or why, but that came out of my mouth.
Ron was convinced that God was speaking to him, guiding him to his greatest discovery of all.
Ron really believed that God was leading him to look for the Ark of the Covenant.
Ron had no idea then that the search for the greatest of all biblical treasures would soon come to dominate his life. But what was the Ark, and why was it so important?
The Ark was the receptacle in which the most important items that ever existed in the world resided, namely the Ten Commandments.
In the Bible, the book of Exodus tells how Moses leads the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt and through the wilderness to Mount Sinai.
As the story goes, when Moses went up to Mount Sinai, he stays there 40 days and 40 nights without eating and without drinking, and then he received from God 2 stone tablets, and the Ten Commandments was inscribed with the finger of God. So it was really an object, created by God, something that came as a gift from a supernatural power.
The importance of the Ten Commandments cannot be overstated, not for how they were written, but what was written on them, God's law. They would become the foundation of Western morality. They are instructions of what must be done.
Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy.
And what must not be done.
Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal.
The commandments were one half of a covenant, a bargain with God. If the people kept his law, he would be their God and deliver them to the promised land.
A covenant is a two-way agreement. Both sides have responsibility. So God took upon himself the responsibility to preserve the Jewish nation.
The Bible says that God commanded Moses to build a container to keep the commandments in. This was the Ark. Reading his Bible, Ron would find a clear description of what it might actually look like.
They shall make an ark of acacia wood. 2 cubits and a half shall be its length, 1 cubit and a half its breadth, and 1 cubit and a half its height.
A cubit is about half a meter. So the ark was 1 meter long, half a meter wide, and half a meter tall. Small, but exquisitely beautiful.
You shall overlay it with pure gold. Inside and outside shall you overlay it, and you shall make on it a molding of gold around it.
Most memorably, God's specification included on the lid of the ark 2 golden statuettes of winged celestial beings, cherubim.
You shall make a mercy seat of pure gold, and you shall make 2 cherubim of gold.
The Bible describes not just a beautiful, grand container for the 10 Commandments. It was so much more. The lid between the 2 golden cherubim was the seat of God Himself.
The cherubim were absolutely remarkable because the presence of God emerged from between the 2 cherubs.
And this is the most important part of all. Legend has it that the ark was a dwelling place for God on earth, dispensing wisdom and unlimited power.
And this was where His presence came down and dwelt. It was His throne on earth. People would die if they touched it because of the glory of God that no human can survive.
As the ark was being carried towards Jerusalem, a man by the name of Uzzah wished to steady it, and because he touched the ark, he dropped down dead.
The ark was described as being an object of immense power, and we get depictions such as in the Indiana Jones movie, where uncovering it unleashed this unspeakable power.
Such was the power of the ark that the Israelites carried it on poles before their advancing army.
The Bible tells us about the usage of the ark. The ark was taken into battle as a symbol of the power of God and the fact that God would be with them as they fought.
But it was not just a weapon. The Bible tells how the ark eased the Israelites' path to the Promised Land.
We're told how the ark was carried through the waters of the River Jordan as the nation was entering into the Holy Land, and thanks to the presence of the ark, miraculously the nation was able to walk on dry land. It's not the ark that has the power, but rather it's the power of God which is manifest through the ark.
Around 3,000 years ago, the ark found a permanent home when King David at last settled the Israelites in Jerusalem. The Bible says David's son, King Solomon, built a great temple on a hill. The ark was to take its permanent place in Jewish ritual deep inside, in a place called the Holy of Holies.
Once a year, on the holy day of Yom Kippurim, the Day of Atonement, the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies. That was the only day of the year in which he would enter into the holiest place on earth in order to pray alongside the ark.
It's one of the world's great mysteries that this most holy object not only disappeared from view, but vanished altogether.
When Solomon builds the temple, we know where it went, in the Holy of Holies, in the back room of the temple. But at some point, the Bible stops talking about the ark.
What happened to it, and where is it now? These 2 questions have obsessed countless generations. There have been many stories over the centuries about what happened to the ark. Adventurers have hunted as far afield as Egypt and Africa, yet it has never been found. The most popular theory is that the Ark was lost in Jerusalem itself, in a cataclysmic invasion.
The destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians in the early part of the 6th century BC is described in the Bible. It's described in the records of the Babylonians and by archaeology.
Ron Wyatt learned that after Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians in 586 BC, nothing more is heard of the Ark. Did the Babylonians take it or destroy it? If they had, surely there would be a historical record of it. They would have boasted about it. The Jews would have lamented it, chronicled it. So if the Babylonians didn't take it away or destroy it, what did happen to it? Ron decided the clue lay in his involuntary words. But who was Jeremiah?
Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah from the village of Anatot, was one of the 3 great prophets of our people, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And he had the tragic responsibility for preparing the people for the destruction of the temple.
Jeremiah was a priest in Solomon's temple, and his duty, having foreseen the danger, was to protect the Ark. Did he have anything to do with its disappearance?
There is one source, the book of 2nd Maccabees, that says that Jeremiah took the Ark and hid it from the Babylonians before the city was destroyed. Now, this is a book that's not in most editions of the Bible today. It's from what we call the Apocrypha.
The prophet Jeremiah, being warned of God, commanded the tabernacle and the ark to go with him. He found a hollow cave wherein he laid the tabernacle and the ark and the altar of incense, and so stopped the door.
The 2nd book of Maccabees also relates that no sooner had Jeremiah's workers sealed the Ark in the cave than they miraculously lost all idea of where it was. The Ark was safe from destruction, but lost. So when Ron voiced the words, "There's Jeremiah's grotto," was he actually indicating the location of the cave where the Ark was hidden? In January 1979, Ron Wyatt had saved enough of his hospital wages to return to Jerusalem. With his sons, Danny and Ronnie, he began his quest to unearth the Ark of the Covenant. But as their own film footage shows, the area he had pointed to looked very inauspicious. It was a rubbish dump.
When we first started digging, there was a dead cat in there and trash. Me and my dad were the first 2 in there, and we were digging in a lot of dust.
We're in real soft ash-like stuff. It's just real soft. Digging down, I got a big cave in on me, and it kind of got me up to about here. I couldn't hardly move, but my head was out. No, I could breathe, but it just kind of trapped me there, so they had to dig me out of that.
Ron wasn't one to let a lack of training or experience hamper his quest for the Ark.
We weren't shoring up the cave as we dug it at all. We weren't putting boards over our heads or shoring anything up.
I'd never dug a hole like that before. We were lucky we didn't bury ourselves probably. Yeah, not the smartest thing.
There are things that could have collapsed on us at any time. It was very dangerous.
Although the Wyatts were inexperienced, they were also lucky. No one was injured, but it seemed their luck had run out when they hit a serious problem.
We were digging along the outside and we broke into the mountain and cleared out a bunch of rock from in there and started digging inside the mountain.
Now, their work stalled. Instead of finding Jeremiah's grotto and the ark, they faced a wall of solid rock.
Once you get past all the loose dirt, it became rock. And so we were literally busting rock, breaking through rock to get to where we were going. We had 3 or 4 buckets and we kept filling them up and crawling out the tunnel. You couldn't stand up, so you were crawling on your hands and knees. My knees were bruised, very, very bruised and swollen from crawling in and out of there.
But the Wyatts' biggest obstacle wasn't the injuries the rock caused them, but the time it added to the dig. Unlike the earlier discoveries, this archaeological quest was taking too long. Ron ran out of money, and he and his sons had to return home to the US.
My dad would run out of money and come back home and work and save up, and then we would quit our job or our school and go right back. As soon as he had a ticket, I'm gone, you know.
Yeah, that was his life's mission, pretty much. He'd come back and work, make money, then go back.
We'd quit anything to go do that, because it seemed really important.
When they returned to Jerusalem the next year, 1980, refunded and reinvigorated, they applied themselves to the obstacle between them and Jeremiah's grotto containing the Ark of the Covenant, the wall of solid rock.
Dad prayed usually in the morning, help us, if we can find something.
We were constantly praying throughout this on a daily basis, because we knew we were clueless.
Once more, Ron seemed to experience a guiding hand. He made a comment to his sons that he was impressed in some indefinable way to cut into the solid rock of the cliff face.
Every time we come to a stumbling block, we had to pray, and somehow we'd get around it and move on.
They set to work faithfully chipping at the solid rock of the cliff. Astonishingly, they broke through the rock into an open space. Could it be a cave? But the dig season for 1980 was ending, so Ron and his sons again had to go home to Tennessee and wait. Now, more than ever, Ron believed that when he returned, the Ark would be waiting. But could the Ark even have survived thousands of years buried in a cave? Even if he had discovered Jeremiah's grotto, Ron might find just a handful of dust.
In the case of the Ark of the Covenant, it's been 3,000 years since it was made. Now, we know, for example, that in Egypt, in a very dry environment, that wood can survive. We've got wooden objects from Egypt in many different tombs.
The Bible tells how God specified that the ark be made of acacia wood. Acacia is exceptionally hard and very dense. It will last a long time. In Egypt, acacia panels have been found over 3,000 years old. If Tutankhamun's ark-like chests survive, why not the Ark? In January 1982, after 3 years of digging, Ron still prayed that he would discover the Ark, excavating in the place God had led him to. But ill health dogged his sons, and he had to send them home.
We had got ill that one time. I had got the flu real bad. Danny got flu. And Danny stayed, I think, for another couple weeks after that, and then he came home.
Even without his sons to help him, Ron wouldn't give up.
He believed so strongly in what he was supposed to do that nothing would stop him.
No, he never gave up. He saw everything through. Even if he almost lost his life, he would regroup and go back again and try it again until he got to where he wanted to be. Yeah, he wasn't afraid.
But now, digging over 20 feet underground, even Ron realized that he couldn't work alone. He enlisted the help of a young local man. Together, they labored in the tunnels he and his sons had worked so hard to open up. One tunnel in particular was very difficult. A narrow passageway leading through a chimney, a tight vertical shaft so small that Ron had to exhale to squeeze through. Inside the tunnel, Ron saw a very small opening in the rock wall. Only Ron's assistant was small enough to wriggle inside. Something about this space seemed to fill him with dread. Gripped by sheer terror, he fled, never to return. Ron believed his assistant must have experienced the power of the Ark. Ron enlarged the opening and squeezed into the confined space. He found himself in a chamber filled with small rocks. He caught glimpses of gold, not the Ark, but ritual objects from the temple. Now he was certain the Ark must be in there somewhere. Crawling painfully over the rocks to the rear of the chamber, Ron saw a partially buried stone case. The lid was so near to the ceiling that he couldn't see inside. Could it contain the Ark? He had to find a way to see inside the stone case. See the Ark. But how? Now, Ron may not have been a professional archaeologist, but he was a professional nurse anesthetist, and now he put his medical knowledge to good use. He wondered whether a medical camera and probe, designed to see inside the human body, would allow him to investigate and identify the contents of the stone case. Alone again in the chamber, Ron pushed the camera into a small hole he drilled in the side of the stone case. And suddenly, there it was. Ron Wyatt was the first person to see the Ark of the Covenant, lost for 2,500 years.
He was crying when he told me. He just said he couldn't believe it.
Ron Wyatt announced to the world that he had found the lost Ark of the Covenant, proof to non-believers of the existence of God. But if he thought he'd achieved his aim, Ron was in for a big surprise. The good news was not received with open arms. Professional archaeologists would need convincing evidence. They would want to see what Ron had seen, the Ark of the Covenant.
When it comes to any amateur enthusiast claiming that they found anything to do with the Bible, my first question to them is, show me the data. Show me your evidence.
Skeptics pointed to the fact that Ron Wyatt was alone when he found the Ark. He had no witness.
If you think you found the Ark of the Covenant, show me a picture.
But Ron didn't produce any pictures. He claimed he did have documents and photos, but was not allowed to show them. In a series of talks, he told people that the Israeli Antiquities Authority, the IAA, had made secrecy a condition of his excavating permit.
I'm not allowed to give the exact location, but I will say that the Ark of the Covenant is exactly where I found it. And we have proven that to the Antiquities Department in Israel. They have the proof, and they know it's been found.
But even the existence of a permit is disputed. Dr. Dan Bahat was the IAA district director at the time.
When I was a district archaeologist of Jerusalem, Ron Wyatt was in Jerusalem with his activities. To the best of my knowledge, he never received any permit to dig in Jerusalem.
Ron could have silenced his critics by simply showing them the Ark of the Covenant. Why not just return to the dig with witnesses? But Ron had bad news there too. He said the access tunnel he had made had been sealed by the authorities with reinforced concrete.
The way that you used to get through it through the garden tomb is closed. Can't get through that way anymore.
Ron Wyatt's claim to have discovered the Ark of the Covenant is backed up by no evidence whatsoever in terms of hard data.
Ron could never produce any evidence of the Ark of the Covenant for anyone. And yes, he did try. He did try.
Professional archaeologists openly expressed the opinion that Ron's discoveries were just too good to be true.
So while it takes years, decades, to become properly trained as an archaeologist, where you can read the ancient text, do the excavations, interpret the data and the analysis, it sounds like anybody can go out and try to find them. Now, the archaeologists know that that's like looking for a needle in a haystack, or rather a needle in many haystacks.
Ron was the first to admit he was an amateur. He believed God was responsible for his discoveries.
It's very obvious that I didn't find these on my own intelligence, or of my own intelligence. I don't think there's anybody on earth clever enough to have found all of these, but God knew where they were from day one, and he wanted everybody to see them.
So what was the truth? Lack of evidence begs the question, had Ron Wyatt made it all up?
As a person, he was a very pleasant person. But to this very day, I cannot make up my mind if he was a crook or a naive person. I say crook with reservation because I think maybe he was naive and he believed in what he said.
I had not known Ron to lie, and I knew he was telling the truth.
That was Dad's whole mission, to show the truth. I mean, he didn't take archaeology or anything. That's why archaeologists don't think that he's legitimate, but God uses people, not necessarily professionals, to do his work.
Those who doubt Ron Wyatt point to one fact in particular. He found exactly what he set out to find, down to the last detail. Even after the ravages of 3,000 years, the Ark he described was exactly as depicted in a Bible picture book. He produced a drawing of just what it looked like, covered in gold and with a decorated gold rim and 2 gold cherubim on the lid.
It is interesting that what Ron Wyatt says he discovered is the typical or conventional description of the Ark. In actuality, if you find the Ark, it may look completely different.
There are, in fact, 2 quite different biblical descriptions of the Ark. Exodus has the Ark constructed by an artist, Bezalel. This is the famous Ark, Ron's Ark, covered all over with the purest gold, its lid with golden cherubim and a decorated rim of gold. But in another biblical account, not in Exodus, but the book of Deuteronomy, the Ark is far simpler. In Deuteronomy, Moses made the Ark himself. Just a simple acacia wood box with no decoration at all. This is a much more plausible container for a nomadic desert tribe to make and carry around with them in the wilderness.
This description of the Ark certainly lends itself to the belief that it's simply a storage box. And we find in archaeology, in King Tut's tomb and elsewhere, similar boxes.
According to professional archaeologists, Ron made a typical amateur's mistake. He went looking for one specific object to support a preconceived view that every Bible story is historically true. Trained archaeologists approach their subject with a more open mind, looking for any artifacts to help guide them to what the historical story might be, never sure what they might find.
You may be looking for one thing, asking one question, and all of a sudden something else pops up.
This is exactly what has just happened to one eminent archaeologist. Professor Yossi Garfinkel of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He's very different from Ron Wyatt, but what he has found may change forever our understanding of the Ark. This is the ancient city of Kirbet Kiafa, above the valley of Elah. Famously, in this valley, about 3,000 years ago, the boy David slew the giant warrior Goliath with a stone from his slingshot. Professor Garfinkel has been digging here for 5 years, looking for neither David, nor Goliath, nor even the Ark of the Covenant.
I'm not trying to prove the Bible. You have the biblical tradition. This is a history which was written by people a few thousand years ago. And what we can do as archaeologists is to see what we are finding.
Professor Garfinkel is looking for nothing and everything. As a result, his dig here in the summer of 2011 unearthed a fragmented clue to what the Ark may actually have been.
During the season, there were many fragments of quite interesting stone vessels, but as they were really broken to many pieces, we didn't realize what it was. So it was nicely packed, all these artifacts, and we sent them to the laboratory for conservation.
Highly skilled conservators explored what might be made of all the pieces. Rather like solving a fiendish 3D puzzle without the picture on the box as a guide. What they eventually rebuilt was extraordinary.
And when I came to see, I really didn't believe my eyes. It was a nice box made of stone, something that was never found before in any archaeological site in Israel or in the ancient Near East.
Professor Garfinkel knew little about the stone box at first, but during investigation, it began to tell its story. It seemed to be a model building of some kind.
This artifact is made from one block of stone, which was carved nicely in the shape of a building, and then it was painted red. There are traces of red pigment here. I think that there was a wooden door which was fixed here to the inside, and there were small pegs which fixed the door to its location.
But what exactly was this small model building used for?
Inside you can see a small depression, probably a base where a statue or maybe a symbol of God, a small stone or something was placed. So what is it? The way I understand it, an object like this, where they kept symbols of God inside it, and it was portable and moved from one place to another according to needs. And I understand it as a portable shrine.
Professor Garfinkel's thesis that this was a portable shrine is supported. When the little building with doors is compared to the biblical account of the Temple of Solomon, where the Ark came to rest, they are eerily similar.
So this is what we called triple recessed doorway or triple recessed door frame. And this is exactly how the Bible describes Solomon's palace and also the entrances in the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem.
But the box couldn't be a model of the temple. Radiocarbon dating tells us it is older than that. What is much more likely to be true is that the temple was a giant version of a portable shrine like this one. Then, Professor Garfinkel, with extraordinary insight, asked a vital question. What did people call this portable shrine when they used it in ancient times?
I think that probably the people in antiquity called such artifact Ark of God. And this is the biblical, the Hebrew name, Aron Elohim, Ark of God or cupboard of God.
So is this the truth about the Ark? That it was not a great and supernatural object? In the Hebrew Bible, the Ark of the Covenant is written Aron Habrit. Aron simply means chest or cupboard, a box to store things in.
In Hebrew, Aron means just a box where you can keep anything inside it. It's not necessarily something holy. Once you put inside a symbol of God, then the artifact became important. Not that the artifact by himself is not just a box. What is important is the meaning people gave to it.
In fact, Professor Garfinkel hasn't found just one ark, but two. The second is made of pottery and is different in form, but it is also a little building with pillars, roof beams, and a door. Garfinkel believes it is another portable shrine, another Ark of God.
I was not looking for anything like the Ark or a thing like this, but once we have them, we need to deal and to interpret them. It's not just you find a nice thing, you put it in the museum and you go home. You also need to understand what you are doing.
Garfinkel's work reveals that there were many arks in many places, ritual shrines used by ordinary people as part of their worship. Does this mean the fabulous golden ark Ron was looking for may never have existed? Not necessarily.
When you have a large temple in Jerusalem, you have a large kingdom, you have a very nice ark, can be made with gold and silver and all kinds of other things. But in the small cities around it and the private houses, people will not have such big artifacts and made from such expensive materials.
So is it the case that the Ark of the Covenant, carried by the Israelites through the wilderness, could have been a simple object different from the one built for the temple in Jerusalem? No one knows for sure.
People can debate it. People can say that I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, but at least I can offer a new interpretation.
What Ron Wyatt would make of this debate, we'll never know. He died in 1999. Until the end of his life, he devoted himself to making many more controversial discoveries. to prove that the Bible is fact. He said he had a sample of Christ's blood from the crucifixion which proved Jesus had no earthly father. He claimed he had an encounter with angels in the chamber where he found his ark.
Tables of stone were found in the Ark of the Covenant. I personally removed them with the assistance of 4 angels who lifted the mercy seat, which I would estimate weighs about 900 pounds of solid gold.
Ron Wyatt was a master at organizing expeditions, getting the public interested, getting money for his expeditions, and creating a huge following. Whether he was a charlatan or a zealot or a madman is up to individual people's opinions.
To those who believe him, he was none of these. He was a man inspired to do his work by his faith.
When I get to heaven, I'm going to look around, and I want to see every one of you there.
I just feel really blessed to have had a dad like my father, and to got to do this work. It's just been an amazing thing.
We may never know the truth about the Ark of the Covenant, but stories of its fabled power and symbolic importance ensure that each generation will dream of finding it.
The Ark exists today. It is somewhere. We know it.
The Ark has not yet been found in any location mentioned by the ancient sources. That doesn't mean it won't be found. If it is, it will be accidental. It will not be because somebody has gone out looking for it. They will have been looking or investigating or excavating something else entirely different. And lo and behold, there it will be.